Hi everyone, this is Scott Barnes and Barry William Hale. This is RADIONOKO Transmission 2. In this presentation today we're going to be talking a little bit about the trip to Canberra, where we saw a recital of Larry Sitsky's work. And then we're going to be covering some of the history both of the NOKO 210 methodology and also some of the origins of the Enochian system that we also use, and some of the various people who've contributed to that down the line. So you want to talk a bit about the Canberra trip, Barry? It was pretty good, yeah?
Yeah, it was a great event, and it was very exciting to see Larry Sitsky's recital by Edward on the piano.
Edward Neiman,
Neiman, yeah.
Yeah, he's world class and was an amazing recital, very strong work.
I had the opportunity, or I was asked to introduce the Golden Dawn, and in that work there's 7 parts, and each one of those parts, I think we talked about this before, but when they used a word from the Enochian language, so I had the opportunity to sort of just talk a little bit about that, and then there was a recital, which was
we had Tor from her performed Tone Testament written by Layla Waddell, and that was a violin recital with that, and that was pretty amazing. Again, a very serious caliber violinist, and really exciting to hear that work in that space as well.
Yeah, I think it was really exciting to listen to Larry Sitsky and Tor actually talking about the composition and the dialogue that opened up musicologically. You know?
Oh, totally, yeah. There was one of the most fun bits, I thought, where Larry Sitsky and Edward Neiman were discussing the build-up to the actual performance of the work, and the amount of time it actually took to get the work down to a level that he was satisfied in terms of the recital. In some ways, I assumed maybe that people at that level just sit down and they play through a score, sight read it a couple of times, and they're ready to go. That obviously wasn't the case, and there's a lot of nuance and a lot of months of work that go into preparing for that kind of work performance.
Yeah, well, I thought it was really interesting too, because listening to Larry and Edward speaking about it, it became apparent that the actual player has a lot of room to interpret the piece, and that Larry seemed to have no problem with that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the way the musician interprets it is an important aspect of the work to him, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a very physically demanding piece, I think, to perform as well.
Yeah, he was talking about using techniques with the forearm on the keyboard, and a lot of quite exacting, sort of rigorous physical playing, and it sounded amazing.
Yeah, so it was great to hear. It was, I think, probably the first time that Layla Waddell's Tone Testament has been performed. It was interesting that people were talking about that they'd heard the piece on YouTube or something, but it was basically the composition put through a...
Yeah, it was a synthesised rendition of it, and some people had mistaken that for live instruments, but obviously anyone classically trained could recognise it was a very synthesised version of it.
Cynthia Cross's lecture on...
on Layla Waddell, that was a real eye-opener for me too. It was the idea that she was part of this super rock group of string players who travelled very widely and did pretty well financially in terms of the times they were working in, especially, I guess, as women superstars. It was amazing. Her life and history were really exciting, and Cynthia did a great job in presenting all that information and what little images that were available around those times too.
Yeah, well, we were talking to Cynthia, and it looks like the biography's in the galleys, so we can look forward to seeing that manifest not too much further down the line. I think Dr. Fiona Fraser's lecture upon the esoteric influences in Australian music was an eye-opener too.
Yeah. There was a lot of good information in there, and really brought a lot of comparisons in from later musical styles. There was a lot of fun musicological breakdown, and a lot of different things there.
So I think in all it was a fairly successful event, and finally I presented a talk upon the Enochian Magical System, and that was it. And so I suppose we should give some shout outs.
Yeah, certainly. David Botterill and Phil Pope and Brendan Walls, and other associated people helping to get things organised and making sure everything ran smoothly. All the audio and everything was really top level.
It was great. Yeah. Really, the facility at the School of Music at ANU was pretty top notch, and it was really great to hear the recitals in a room that's designed for performances as well.
Yeah, that's right. To have a space that's set up acoustically for those kind of instruments to sound at their best. So Barry, you have some recollections around the early days of the Noko project back in the early 90s, and how that links into our evolving use of the various structures around the Enochian, and you want to talk a little bit too about the origins of some of the differences with those structures, yeah?
Yeah, sure. Well, Scott and I met at art college, and also there was another person that Scott had been working with in an audio-visual context, exploring some mystical...
But yeah, that's right. Mike Strum was someone who I was working with little, and he was very interested in Kabbalistic magic and ritual and so forth, and we were doing some basic kind of angelic workings based around some of the Kabbalistic systems, which involved live ritual and sound. And then I think you met Michael, and we decided to embark on a project involving all three of our processes.
Yeah, I think, I'd already known, we'd known each other. And anyway, so that was the original triangulation, and also there was another member originally, Michelle Moo, who we worked with in the Watchtower workings. So it was kind of pretty much decided that, hey, it would be kind of like something exciting to work within a magical artistic context and bring our respective skill sets to the table. I had worked a little bit with the Enochian system in the previous years, initially when I joined the OTO, and then by the from the very early 90s, we'd had some work as a group with exploring the aethers and looking at the vision and the voice, and so basically where I think I was at with exploring the system was looking at the Watchtowers specifically. So we decided that we would explore the 4 great Watchtowers of D's system and the sub-quadrants therein, and finally after that also we did some workings with the Tablet of Union, and basically our source material was Liber Chanokh, an early Golden Dawn iteration of the Enochian Magical System, some people referred to as Neo-Enochian.
So, everyone's obviously heard a bit about the Golden Dawn, but who are they and what's their relationship to Enochian magic?
I suppose that's a good place to start. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, its foundational documents known as the cipher manuscripts, which were written using a cipher of Trimetheus, who was the teacher of Paracelsus and Agrippa, outlying these manuscripts outline the great initiation rituals and the curriculum of successive degrees in the order, and the teachings of the order of the Golden Dawn included Hermetic Kabbalah, astrology, tarot, geomancy and alchemy. I think according to the GD's version of history, it involves a few Masonic scholars. I mean, these guys were early members of the SRIA, and the first person of interest is Kenneth Mackenzie. Kenneth Mackenzie was an Masonic scholar, and as I said, a member of the SRIA. And he passes the cipher manuscripts to another guy called Adolphus Woodford. And Woodford was a field marshal and an ordained priest and a Masonic scholar. But Woodford really didn't seem to be that interested in the cipher manuscript and passed it on to Wynne Westcott. So Wynne Westcott decodes the manuscript in 1887, contacts fellow Masons Samuel Liddell, McGregor Mathers for a second opinion with the aim of turning the context into a workable system. And lastly, they finally enlist the help of another Masonic friend or colleague called Robert Woodman, and to complete their tasks. And that's pretty much, they decide to kind of form the Ruby Rose and the Golden Cross, and we kind of know that as the GD.
So what was the Golden Dawn source for Enochian magic specifically? How was it integrated into the Golden Dawn system of initiation?
Well, like as I sort of pointed out, like the initiation ceremonies of the Golden Dawn were originally drawn from the cipher manuscript, and the GD was originally constituted in 1887. All the initiation ceremonies of the order from the grade of Zelator to Philosophus contain references to Enochian. But it's not until the level of Zelator Adeptus Minor that it becomes the subject of regular instruction and methodological investigation. So, I mean, it's kind of speculated that Mackenzie was the reputed author of the cipher manuscript, which included reference to the Table of Earth or the Enochian table of John Dees. Westcott and the co-founders of the Golden Dawn heavily modified portions of the Enochian system with permission from a German secret master, which we now know as Anna Sprengel. In 1891, it was kind of asked whether they could incorporate the Enochian system into the Golden Dawn rituals and take the stuff from the cipher manuscript. So, I mean, it should be pointed out that it is claimed that at some unknown time between Dee's death and the founding of the Golden Dawn, someone took the Dee's Book of Supplications and greatly expanded it at least 10 times or more than its original size. And that's a long time there's a lot of history, there's a lot of history in between. So, and there's been a lot of people that have speculated upon, who was, in possession of Dee's. We know who was in possession of Dee's manuscripts after he passed away. And we also know that there were some figures connected within, early Masonry and angel magic, and that's maybe a story that we can go into maybe in the next podcast when I talk about more, Dee's original, a more Dee purist approach of taking Dee's manuscripts and constructing a system that was workable and very close to what maybe perhaps the speculated Dee intended. But so we'll leave it there. But I mean, it's important to sort of point out that the Golden Dawn system of Enochian, and some people refer to that as Neo-Enochian, basically is different. There's some differences, and I think we'll explore that later in the interview. Oh, and I think that the other thing to mention is that initially the Golden Dawn, one of their sources was Book H.
So what is actually the content of Book H? Are there any other documents or teachings in the Golden Dawn that elaborate upon their version of the Enochian magical system?
Yeah, well, the focus of Book H is entirely based upon the angelic magic of the Great Table, D's Great Table, and the Watchtower systems, and the 18 keys or cores which were delivered in the in 1580s period by D and Kelly. And although some of this period of time, in part, is captured by Casaubon's publication of the True and Faithful Relationship, that's an abbreviation of the full title. People familiar with the Enochian system will be familiar with Casaubon's work. And Casaubon was basically like a great detractor, and ironically, some of the greatest detractors become the greatest promulgators of preserving what's considered heresy. I mean, Irenaeus on heresies is another example, I think. And so the manuscript it's a compilation from the manuscript from the British Library, Sloane, but Book H is. There's the references that period, and also another manuscript found in Sloane, 307, which comprises specifically of groups of angelic invocations from the Great Table, and so these are the main sources of Book H, and they include a deconstruction of the structure of the 4 watchtowers and the 16 sub-quadrants and their subdivisions, and also a method of decrypting the angel names. And like we were saying, Book H significantly expands upon D's material, and the number of angels that are drawn from the watchtowers vastly outnumbers the ones that were even delivered to D, and also elaborates on the functions of these angels and carcodemons. So it's considered, you'd have to consider it a significant expansion of D's system. So the next contribution of the Golden Dawn to Enochian Magic on from Book H is the Book of the Concourse of Forces, which incorporates various aspects of the Order's curriculum applied to the Great Table. So if you don't know what the Great Table is, the Great Table is basically like a way of presenting the 4 watchtowers with a great cross in the middle. So it sort of like holds, sort of like the mortar to hold it together, which the Golden Dawn sort of extrapolates like the Tablet of Union from. In the Book of the Concourse of Forces, you could kind of pretty much, it's been described as a symbolic compendium of the entire Golden Dawn cosmology applied to the Enochian system. I think there's other various writings. There's some scant references in the flying rolls and other bits and pieces, but the next significant bulk of the Golden Dawn material after the Concourse of Forces is this stuff doesn't really see the light of day until the Golden Dawn material specifically doesn't really see the light of day until the latter publications by Israel Agadi, the Golden Dawn in the 40s, and latter the complete golden system of the complete system of the Golden Dawn system of magic, which is sometimes known as the Yellow Brick. So the Golden Dawn took the kernel of the Enochian system and gave it flesh and transformed it into a fully formed system of ceremonial magic, and really they considered I think it's considered the pinnacle of the Golden Dawn curriculum. Another innovation upon these version of the watchtowers is that whether or not it's an innovation, is open to debate and speculation. However, whereas in D's system, the watchtowers were ascribed to the cardinal directions, cardinally, the Golden Dawn associates the 4 watchtowers with the elemental forces associated with the cardinal directions. So the cardinal directions associated with the elemental forces really, the work of the adept becomes the central axis of the Concourse of Forces, really. And then we're looking at the Enochian system placing the watchtowers about the adept, and it becomes a work of their spiritual evolution of the adept, I suppose. So it's kind of taking a macrocosmic view and applying it to the microcosm, and an internal development magically.
So you're going to be putting some of these images of the detail of the different tablets and so forth up to go along with the talk, I think you were saying before, which would be really good. Certainly one of the things that strikes someone who is new to looking at anything to do with the Enochian system is the seeming very structured colour attributions that you see. Could you talk about some of the origins of the colour associations and what they're actually meaning within some of these diagrams? And listeners can just scroll back and forth and locate some of the images on the timeline to see what Barry's talking about here.
Yeah, sure. Well, the colour associations that most people are familiar with is actually the colours that the associated with the elements. So the colour associated with the elements of the Golden Dawn system, and the Golden Dawn looks at these squares and divides them into, presents them as a truncated pyramid. So each square of the watchtowers is presented as a truncated pyramid, which has 4 different spaces which associations become ascribed to. And like I said, that there's no explicit within Dee's work of associations. Like I said before, he only really associates them with the cardinal directions, but there are color. So there are color associations in one of the primary visions of Kelly, the vision of the watchtowers. But so the ones that we're familiar with are the Golden Dawn ones, which ascribe the elemental colours that they work with to their elemental schema of the watchtowers. But it's important to remember that the colour associations in the Golden Dawn were gradually introduced within the Golden Dawn initiatic system. And so basically through the initiatic system, there was a gradual unfoldment. So, initially you receive the tables, which are just like squares with the letters in them and stuff like that. And then sort of the extra depth of the associations and the color associations and the elemental, astrologic and sephirotic associations. It's gradually unfolded through your initiatic, through your initiatic path through the Golden Dawn system. So the major discrepancy really is the associations that the Golden Dawn made with the 4 watchtowers, so the elemental color associations, and the vision that Kelly has of the watchtowers ascribed to the cardinal directions. And those colors, from memory, is white, I think, white and green, black and red. Whereas in the Golden Dawn association, the tablet of the east is ascribed to air, which is yellow. The south is ascribed to fire, which is red. The west is associated with water, which is blue. And the north is associated with earth, which is black. So there's some significant differences in colours to speculate on. And I think that's pretty much the, that's the essential sort of difference there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I remember when we started the Watchtower workings, we were using Crowley's Liber Chanokh. Could you discuss any differences between Crowley's and the Golden Dawn's rendition of the Enochian system?
Yeah. When we started the Watchtower workings, pretty much the reference material was primarily Liber Chanokh and supplemented by the Golden Dawn material, which had been published. It's interesting to point out that Regardie, who would go on to Israel Regardie, would go on to be a major figure in the reconstitution of the Golden Dawn. And he was Crowley's secretary at one time. said that the Enochian magic taught by the Golden Dawn was an effective and powerful synthesis both of theoretical and practical occult philosophy. I'd have to agree with him that the Neo-Enochian system developed from the kernel of what D left it is quite an incredible achievement. I mean, a lot of people will go on the D purist school, go on later, having more access to D's original manuscripts and having a greater exposure of material than the founders of the Golden Dawn had. Oftentimes sort of beg to differ or sort of see that the Golden Dawn sort of appropriation or overlay of their system upon D's Enochian system is kind of like not really what D intended, but, you know, I mean, as a testament to the innovativeness and of the Golden Dawn, I mean, they did a pretty incredible job with what they had. We were working with Liber Chanokh, and I think going back to Regardie, you know, he's kind of the opinion that the keys and the tables and stuff were really remained useless in the hands of D and Kelly, and that Kelly was afraid of them and afraid of the material. D revered it. I don't know whether or not I really agree with that opinion, but finally, for Regardie, the Enochian material that was elaborated by the senior members of the Golden Dawn, like I said before, it was the pinnacle of their magical innovation, and that the quintessence of their system sort of articulated with that, you know, combining, you know, the macrocosm and microcosm and Sephirotic Kabbalistic sort of associates the zodiacal, planetary, elemental, astral, and fusing esoteric tarot, astrology, geomancy into a unified, practical and workable system was kind of considered like the crowning jewel. I mean, you know, it's a little bit of a mouthful, but essentially that's what's, you know, kind of going on. But that being said, you know, like Crowley's Liber Chanokh, which is the full title of his Liber vel Chanokh Subfigura 84, a brief abstract of the symbolic representation of the universe derived by Dr. John Dee through the scrying of Sir Edward Kelly. And basically what Crowley's sort of doing, it's a compilation of the contents of the Concourse of Forces and Book H, utilizing, so he utilizes all of the associative correspondences, but he uses the Great Table of Raphael, which was kind of like received later, or was like an amended Great Table that was kind of, you know, Raphael sort of advised them that, you know, you need to make a few changes. So he restored the watchtowers into the Great Table of the Earth, which showed that the watchtowers with the black cross. Then he displays, this is how it appears in Liber Chanokh. So he's got the Great Table. He kind of gives the classic Golden Dawn depiction with the truncated pyramids of the four watchtowers, which includes a graphical representation of the assignment of the astrological, elemental, Sephirotic symbols on the side of the pyramid. So pretty much straight down the line, GD. Then he goes to explain the basics of the Golden Dawn method of decrypting and deriving angel names from the watchtowers. He lists the 38th as the 91 parts of the earth that are derived from the governors of the 38th, and the manner of how to apply the 48 keys of calls, their association with the sub-quadrants and the aethers. But there's... So, you know, like he does that, but then he goes on to, I mean, the point of difference between Chanokh and the Golden Dawn is that Liber Chanokh includes a diagram of the Holy Table, which is the table from Cosbon and Dee's diaries, which is the table of practice, which is basically like the ritual setup of how to have the angelic operations. And he also includes a picture of the sigil D Ameth, which is a wax and seal. It's a complicated sort of diagram, which the crystal ball, you know, D would place the ball and stuff. A brief analysis of the the names found on the Sigil de Ameth are basically. He also makes mention, Crowley makes mention of the heptarchic system, which the GD, to my knowledge, I don't think it really talks about it. And also, it's a system. It's a system that was received of planetary magic that D received, and also the Book of Logareth, which was the massive tome of tables and stuff, like in the manner after the Trimethian tables, or the found with Trimethus, or the Book of Soiga. So in his editorial promise says that they will elucidate further upon these aspects in the future publication, which unfortunately weren't forthcoming, but that doesn't really mean that he wasn't doing it. So he sort of said, I'm going to talk about these different aspects or these different systems in further publications of the equinox or down the track. But there is some evidence that Crowley did do a second part of Enoch, and it looks very much based upon these Book of Supplications. We'll see what happens there, but it's around. Another significant thing that has to be mentioned with the Book of Enoch is, like, Crowley basically published The Vision and the Voice, Liber Chanokh, in his Equinox in the early part of the 1900s. So this was the first time that Enochian Magick was really made public. I mean, Regardie published his Golden Dawn thing in the 40s, and it sort of predates it by, almost 3 decades, really. And particularly Volume 1 of the Equinox, 7 and 8. So that was the first time that the Enochian material was really made available to students of occultism outside, I think, of the Golden Dawn or Golden Dawn derived orders, and there's only a few of them really. And so that's really when I think many people would have got their first glance at the Enochian system. And also in Liber Chanokh, there's a table of a depiction of the Enochian alphabet, and I think that was really something that really fascinated me, and pretty much was the beginning of 3 decades of research into the Enochian alphabet, and almost 3 decades of work with Noko 210.
Yeah, well, there's certainly like a heap of material there to cover. I think we're going to wrap it up around this stage of the history, because, you're talking Canberra went for quite a long time, and there's some materials you'll discuss in relation to our history and presenting some of the Noko audio as well. But is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we wrap up the podcast for today, bro?
No, I just I think that it's important to talk about, like, our historical engagement in with Enochian Magick, and that in the early days with the Watchtower workings, working with utilising the keys and the Watchtowers and generating audiovisual works. Initially, that was the system that we were using, and with publications and people and research happening in the 80s and early 90s, that was sort of starting to be circulated. There was a much greater amount of material to work with, and I think that our way of working with the Enochian Magical System moved on significantly from the GD system. So we'll probably track that course, but I think it's important to talk about our beginnings with it and put the GD and Liber Chanokh into context overall as being the initial source material for our Watchtower workings.
Yeah, it's good to put in the bedrock about the history of the whole deal, because it is a very complex subject, and to understand at least some of the early history, it'll make a bit more sense when Barry's talking about innovations he's made to the interpretations of the use of the system in later episodes or other historical discussion.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different material that we've kind of explored and covered, and we'll go a little bit more into sort of specific kind of aspects of that from D, and also looking at people that came later and started to try to reconstruct D's system outside of the framework of the Golden Dawn, and just with reference to D's material. I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit later down the track, but I mean, I think people like Clay Holden from the John Dee Society, who was doing publications, and also Joseph Peterson from the Twilight Grotto, and other early pioneers of esoteric research and uncovering and making available those works really changed the landscape.
So Barry, maybe we'll round out the conversation today just by going back to some of the workings we did with the Watchtowers in the 90s. Maybe you'd like to describe the actual process of how we'd set up and work through some of the Watchtowers. At that stage, often we were working with Michelle Moo and Michael Strum, Michael was doing the video work with it, and Michelle was performing the ritual working and participating in vocals as well. So you just want to give a bit of a rundown? Yeah,
so basically, I suppose like our process would be we would use the opening of the Watchtowers along a GD level, and orientated to, like I said, an elemental framework. We would do the opening of the Watchtowers, and then we would proceed to doing the calls that were associated with the Watchtowers, like or the sub-quadrants. So 4 of the workings were basically doing opening and the entire Watchtower itself, and then we would go into that specific Watchtower and do the sub-quadrants. And so I suppose what it would look like would be situated around a actual physical Watchtower, which was constructed by myself. And, if people want to understand the structure of the Enochian system along the GD lines, my advice would be that you kind of learn it through constructing those elaborate tables. We would have some sigillic graphical representation. We would utilize various names of power drawn from the Watchtower or the sub-quadrants. Some of the information or data that was considered or that I'd passed to Scott would be the numbers that occur within the calls themselves, that and other Kabbalistic types of associations with the elements, and then Scott would work with generating.
I was working, I think, with an Ensoniq EPS 16 Plus sampler and some other machines, maybe a DX7 as well, doing some FM back then, as well as processing all the vocals and so forth. As usual, I'd take data from the sigils or from the tables or whatever was relevant to the working, and I'd incorporate those numbers into some of the process I was working with the audio, very similar to how I do it using any platform, but I was using different technology a little back then to I'd use today.
Yeah, and Michael would work generating imagery and content based around associative stuff, and also allowing for generating work during the actual working. So the actual pieces would take a series of workings until we were satisfied that the work could be documented and recorded. Those recordings with the video and sound content became Video Chanokh, which was a compilation of the workings with the Watchtower sub-quadrants and the Tablet of Union. So, I mean, it took us a number of years to get through them all. And then after the calls were recited, there'd be a period of time to scry, and any visions or informations were recorded and documented. Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
So Barry, I'm going to queue up a short section from the working text, which is one of the only surviving records from that period of our work. One that I'm hoping to get out as a release sometime soon, so other people can also hear it. It's an interesting work, and yeah, very good example of the early working of the Noko 210.